All right, welcome to Hot Takes Tony. I think this is going to be episode 5. So, what I wanted to talk about today was the interesting trajectory between Joe Rogan and Bill Burr. You know, I've watched Joe Rogan at least since 2015. So I've really seen an evolution from him before then. I know his show was going on for a few years before that. I think since like 2010 or something. Anyway, I really started watching in 2015 and seeing kind of where his political positioning was then. We didn't really, Bill Burr has always been a very, loudmouth comedian. I don't know if he's ever really, in his earlier years, been super political. I mean, I think there would be like little things you'd hear in his work, here and there. But Rogan was very politically opinionated, and he was very much on the left. If you listen to pretty much everything prior to 2020, he was about like loose border security and basically like you shouldn't, even if somebody is an illegal immigrant, they shouldn't be sent back, to their country if they didn't commit a crime, if they're just, if they haven't done anything wrong. That was his stance on that issue. Also believed in universal health care, also believed in, the inner city communities being funded by the government to help, make them more safe, and funding the schools to make sure that every kid in those inner cities had, a decent education, because if you are a, person who pays property tax, that schools are actually funded by the property tax of the area that they're in. The majority of it, yes, there's some, federal funding, but the vast majority of the funding comes from property taxes of where they're at. So if your kids go to a school in an area that is, is not great in terms of the income it's generating, which can also generate property taxes from the revenue of the property, the schools probably are not going to be too great, unfortunately. So your kids are going to suffer. So that's where, whether it's additional funding from the state or the federal government to help those communities, right? He was for that. Now, again, I'm not bringing up that specific issue right now to debate. I'm just kind of showing you the Joe Rogan evolution. And him and Bill Burr, you would also see throughout this time, were a lot closer. Billy Boy, he'd be on that Rogan podcast at least once to twice a year. They were very close. They would, do shows together. One of the legendary Bill Burr Rogan moments was when the night of the 2016 presidential election, the Trump v. Hillary election, Rogan hosted this, I don't know if he called it like the End of the World podcast or something, where it was Joe Rogan, Bill Burr, Bert Kreischer, Joey Diaz, Dan, where the fucking guy is that wears those funny suits all the time. He had all those guys there, and it was hilarious. It was, moment after moment. But one of like the key moments was, Joe told Bill Burr he should eat some elk meat once in a while, and Bill just said, because Rogan was wearing that like fucking hat or whatever, and he told him, just go there with your fucking what was that fucking movie? Go there with your what the fuck was it? Little Munchkins hat or something, whatever the fuck, Little Rascals. Just go there with just take your Little Rascals hat and calm the fuck down. And, it was a hilarious moment. And, they clearly had a lot of love for each other, and they would always, be around each other and stuff like that. And definitely came from the same circle of comedy. But as time went on and as their political trajectories, definitely, drifted apart, we stopped seeing them together, right? I think the last time Burr was on Rogan's podcast, they got into it about the vaccine stuff, and Bill was like, you're not a doctor, so why are we're both not doctors, why are we debating this issue? And you could tell it was getting a little heated, and that was the last time I think he was on that podcast, and that was like, 2021, maybe 2022. So, we haven't seen anything with them together. We haven't seen them really bring each other up in conversations. I think that Rogan did bring up how when Bill Burr went to one of those UFC matches with his wife, how his wife, flicked off Donald Trump when Donald Trump was in front of them. And, Rogan kind of made like a snide remark about it. And, I guess if you're Bill Burr's wife, you can, flick off Trump. And, and that was like it. So it seems like they've clearly drifted apart politically. And Rogan has become way more of a mouthpiece of not just the right. He's become a mouthpiece for the rich oligarch right, which is like, the most demonic, worst fucking part of the right wing to represent, because they really are the antithesis of what his original values were. These people do not support universal health care. These people do not support funding underfunded schools and helping underprivileged communities. These people don't support old people and retired people, having some kind of base level of income. And they definitely don't support universal basic income, all of which things Rogan, before 2020, or pre-2021, I'll say, because, again, Rogan endorsed Bernie Sanders, okay? That's, I think that's important for people to not forget. And I think that's, ironically, him endorsing Bernie Sanders, helped give credit to his endorsement of Donald Trump. Because I think there was a time Rogan was really willing to listen to people and be more of like a vessel for information than projecting information and the information that he wants and seeks, and really only focusing on that. And then he became a fucking butt boy for Elon Musk, and Elon Musk is such a genius, blah blah blah. That's all this guy fucking says. How can anyone dislike Elon? He's such a genius. I don't fucking buy it, but so again, and even if whether Elon's a genius or not, I'm not going to debate that because it's stupid. But, for Rogan to completely like abandon all his values, coincidentally, I'm not saying this is the full motivation, but it is quite the coincidence that the same time he was infused with $200 million, then some of these old kind of, looking out for the little guy, looking out for the working man, wanting the government to help the underprivileged in American society. It's funny how he started teetering away from that, right? And then, you go to Joe Rogan now, who Joe Rogan is today and who Joe Rogan was in 2015. These people would have gotten into a brutal fist fight. I mean, it's as opposite as night and day. It is insane if you go back and look at some of those clips from his from the era of those few years. Bill Burr has become way more outspoken in terms of like left-wing stuff, and very, very outspoken about the billionaires and saying, billionaires should be hunted down like dogs. This is like really intense stuff to be saying as, a successful person. And, Rogan is, really, really like not trying to bring that topic up. And that's what I noticed with him. Something that like, if there's a topic that he would have been on a certain side of, he tries either shying away from it, or, you know, really just spending the tiniest microscopic amount of time on the topic. Like the Luigi Mangione stuff, like, you know, he like, when he brings it up, it's like, oh, you know, how could you, you know, you still hurt somebody in cold blood. You still murdered somebody in cold blood, so how can anyone be cheering that on? As much as we don't like, you know, the healthcare system, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's his, you know, that's pretty much his default take on that. Where Bill Burr is like, you know, he's basically calling for that action because the American people are clearly growing more and more distraught over the income inequality of this country. I mean, it's no coincidence that as the billionaire class has consumed more and more wealth, that the people at the bottom of the spectrum financially have gotten worse and worse off. And the number of American homeless citizens has skyrocketed. I mean, we're almost at 1 million homeless American citizens. I mean, think about that for a second. If you would have told me in the 90s or in the early 2000s that there would one day be almost 1 million American citizens that are homeless, I would have been like, you must be talking about like some third world country or something. It sounds insane, but that's just the reality of the situation. So as this income gap further divides, and it's not going to just stop on its own. The only way to stop it, if you want to do it the nice way, is that the billionaires themselves, they have, because they're the ones that really run this country anyway. So you could even, you know, you could try creating government policy to say, hey, we're going to, you know, increase the tax of the billionaires by this like tiny amount or whatever kind of bullshit, you know, settlement that they would come up with. But the billionaires themselves have to be like willingly paying into a system that the money is going to the homeless, going to people at the bottom of the financial spectrum, making sure everyone has health care, and just some level of base income. So, you know, they have to, that's the only way to keep this train going, where there is not going to be a, you know, violent revolution. That's the only way. And that may not even stop the revolution from happening. The revolution may be imminent because I think a lot of Americans and just a lot of people in the world are feeling like there's no point in billionaires existing. They don't serve a purpose. And what the modern billionaire, you know, tycoon has become is, this is just a person who buys up small companies, and then when there's a competitor to the companies they own, they buy that company. They're not adding anything to the world. They're not adding anything of benefit. It's not like the days of, you know, decades past where, you know, Steve Jobs, he created something and put that out there, and that was his thing. Steve Jobs was not a vulture capitalist. But now we're at the point where it's just, that's what these people are. These people serve zero benefit to society, and they're only taking the wealth from the society for themselves. Things for everyone else are getting worse and worse and worse. And this is, you know, this is obvious to everybody. You know, some people don't admit it, some people do, but it's just becoming more and more obvious. So the only way to prevent a violent civil unrest revolution is to stop those things from happening, is to make sure that everybody in the country is taken care of. But I don't think they're going to do that because these motherfuckers are like drug addicts. They can't help themselves. They're like crackheads. They're like junkies. And even though their greed will inevitably lead to their death, it'll inevitably, that's the only way this story ends. Doesn't end any other way. So even though their drug addiction to greed, to money, will lead to their death, will lead to terrible things, even for themselves, they are unable to stop. They just can't do it. They have to continue accumulating more wealth and more power. And that's why we have a situation where we literally have the richest person in the world, Elon Musk, in control of the White House. It's always been like in the past like 50 years, you know, the rich have clearly had influence over the government, and as time's gone on, they've had more and more influence. But it was kind of done in like some shadowy way, some like, you know, oh well, they're donors, but we're not beholden to them. They're just helping our campaign. Now there's no denying it. I mean, that's, you know, it is at the very least it is honest. I will give them that, it is honest. But back to the Bill Burr Rogan thing. So, you know, it is interesting because, you know, they clearly, you know, the politics have clearly stopped them from being friends. Now, maybe there was something personal that happened between them that had nothing to do with politics, and maybe it's a coincidence that as their politics drifted further and further apart, it just, you know, shit went south. But it's, you know, it's clear that they are not on the same page. It's clear that they are not friends. And, you know, it's an interesting thing. And Bill Burr is, I think, one of the most prolific, or if not the most prolific comedian of our time.